Miami Condo Mondays is a live podcast on the first workday of the week at 4 p.m. South Florida time. The program features former journalist and current Wall Street consultant Peter Zaleski of the Miami Condo Investing Club and former lender and veteran condo broker Jenny Huertas of CBRealty.com. Recorded weekly in greater downtown Miami, this one-hour discussion will provide a refreshing and sometimes controversial perspective on the state of the South Florida condo market from a pair of seasoned real estate professionals who do not always agree. The program won't tell you what to think about the South Florida condo market, but will give you something to think about before buying, selling, taking listings, or financing units. This podcast is not authorized by the Miami real estate industry and will quite possibly annoy many of its figureheads. Welcome to this week's episode of Miami Condo Mondays, broadcast live on the social media accounts of Peter Zaleski and Jenny Huertas.
Happy Monday. This is Peter Zaleski. I'm a condo consultant. I'm also the founder of the Miami Condo Investing Club. If you are tuning in and you're listening live or watching live, or maybe you're going to see this sometime in the future, you should know this is a podcast we do every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and or South Florida time. So what do we do with this podcast? And more importantly, where's my partner? My partner, Jenny Huertas from CVR Realty. She's a broker. She's traveling today. Therefore, she's not going to be available. So I'm going to have to carry the load all on my own. Anybody who's ever heard me speak knows that I speak very quickly. Now I get extra time to be able to go on and on and on about whatever I think is sort of important. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the Fort Lauderdale area. I'm going to give you a little bit of history. I'm going to give you a local's perspective. And then we're going to get into some of the numbers. We'll tell you what's going on with the condo market in Fort Lauderdale. We'll also tell you how it compares sort of to the rental market. So maybe you're somebody who's out there taking a look at maybe wanting to buy a condo in Fort Lauderdale. Maybe you already own a condo and you're thinking about selling it, or you're not sure what to do. Maybe you're a renter. Maybe you're an investor sort of looking around for deals. I should be able to deal with all of that stuff today. The content I'm going to be referring to will be coming from a variety of different sources, and I will cite the sources whenever we get into it. But as for the condo statistics, I took the easy way out, the lazy way out, tapped into the multiple listing service, and I'm going to be giving you real-time data as to what pertains to the multiple listing service. If you don't know what the multiple listing service is, it's effectively a database that's used by people who have a real estate license. They join a club called the Realtors, and because they pay their $1,000 a year or whatever the dollar amount is, they're able to tap into and use this database where they can try to market properties, i.e. sell them, and or they can use the database in order to find properties. I did an interview probably about 3 years back now with a professor. He used to be over at Florida Atlantic University. Now he's over at the University of Mississippi. He's head of real estate over there. And during the conversation, he said that roughly, if you rely on a site like Zillow, roughly 80 to 85% of all of the content, the data, the statistics and numbers you're going to see are effectively going to be reflecting the multiple listing service. The multiple listing service is critical. It's key to the overall marketplace. But again, it's an easy way. It doesn't necessarily reflect everything that's on the market. What wouldn't be on the market in the multiple listing service? Well, things like we buy ugly houses, things like for sale by owner. What else is not in the multiple listing service? Well, those rentals, those towers with 300 units, and there's a guy outside dressed up in a chicken outfit, flipping a sign, telling you if you pull over now, you go in there and you talk to somebody, you might get a month or two free rent. Those are not in the multiple listing service simply because the ownership body of these groups, they're typically called REITs, Real Estate Investment Trust, or corporate landlord, whatever you want to call them. They typically don't want to pay a commission on all the different units in their place. I mean, think about it, 300 units. And if the commission is going to be 10% of the gross annual rent, that's a lot of cash to be paying out every year, every time you try to renew a lease. For instance, if a place is renting for $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year in rent, which I know is completely low. It's out of touch. It doesn't make sense. But that $12,000 a year, or 10% commission, is $1,200. $1,200 commission. Now multiply that times 300 units in a building, and you can see why many real estate investment trusts, they decide to hire a couple people. They put them in a leasing office. They pay them a salary, and therefore they don't have to pay commissions. But because of that, rental data is not going to be in the multiple listing service. So I say it every single time. Do not rely on rental statistics. They're not good. They're bad. It's all across the board. There's no government document that has to be recorded. There's no way for a third party to come in there and evaluate it. And because of that, rental statistics should be viewed with serious skepticism. However, That being said, if you do want to track the rental market, what you can do is you can tap into something like the multiple listing service. You can tap into Zillow. You can tap into anything like that. Do not rely on averages, only rely on medians. Why? Because rental data tends to be based on everything from daily rentals, the weekly rentals, the monthly rentals, the annual rentals. So it's all across the board. But if you pull rental data that is median, it's going to give you something that's kind of right there in the middle. So we're talking about Fort Lauderdale today. This is Miami Condo Mondays. I like to say, maybe it's the last hour of the workday, or maybe you got off work and you're stuck in traffic. You're on I-95, you're going north, or maybe you're somewhere else in the world thanks to the internet. Maybe you're on a train. Turn off the 1980s classic rock and tune in every Monday from 4 to 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we'll teach you something about what's going on in the condo market. We'll give you straight talk. We'll give you information about what's playing out right now as we speak. Here's my pitch. Here's my plug for you to consider. I run a club. I started a club last year, and the club basically is to try to provide information to do-it-yourselfers. Somebody wants to buy a condo on their own. They want to take advantage of the change in the commission structure related to the realtors. They feel like they don't need a broker. They can fend for themselves. Well, we're providing data. We're providing insight. We're providing analysis for individuals like that. We're also providing it for realtors. Maybe you're a realtor. You don't really know what's going on in the market. You see everything you're seeing, but you're a little bit skeptical. You don't believe all the rosy, positive news that's coming out, and you want a third party sort of give you some data. So that's effectively what we're doing with the club. If you do consider joining the club, and by the way, if you do want to check into it, go to miamicondo.club, miamicondo.club. There you'll get all kinds of information. Basically, we're publishing 5 to 6 reports per week. A lot of it's going to be behind paywalls. We do a variety of different videos. We do a monthly virtual meeting. Our monthly virtual meeting for July. It's always done on the second Wednesday of the month, and we do it from 12 till about 1 o'clock, and then there's a 15-minute questions and answer period, kind of like getting on a Zoom session. So we do a monthly virtual meeting. In that monthly meeting, basically talk about where we are, what we've just gone through, and kind of give you some insight as to where we are going forward from somebody who's been in South Florida, Miami since 1993. I was a journalist for 13 years. I then transitioned right before the peak of the great condo boom in South Florida, which led ultimately to the Great Recession. So I've been tracking this market. I've been following this market, and I give straight talk about this market. One last note on the club. If you go ahead and you are interested in the club, we also do a monthly meetup. Most of the stuff will be virtual, but once a month we get together, and we're rotating locations because we are throughout South Florida. So we rotate locations. We go to a different place, and if you want to pop in as a club member, come on down, talk shop. There's a cash bar. It's typically discounted. We try to find a place that's relatively easy to get to, relatively easy to park, and it's not going to be crowded. We always do our meetups on Tuesdays. We do them on the third Tuesday of the month. Reason we do it on a Tuesday is Tuesdays are notorious quiet and slow at restaurants and or bars. So as we're bouncing around, plus you don't really have too many sporting events going on other than maybe like a baseball game or something. But Tuesdays are dead. Therefore, when we go into a bar or something like that or a restaurant, we got plenty of room and it's not overbearing in terms of the sound. So, virtual monthly meeting and a monthly meetup where you get together physically and you can talk shop with people, and a rotating location. Last month, we did it in Coral Gables. This month, we're doing it in downtown Miami. The following month, we'll be going up there in and around the Little River neighborhood in Miami. After that, we'll go into Hallandale, Hollywood area, and then we'll go into Fort Lauderdale. We'll see as we get into winter. We really want to try to break through and go into Boca Raton and then possibly, and might be a long shot, possibly even going into the West Palm Beach area. But if you want to talk condos, you want to know anything about South Florida condos, and you're sick of all the rosy sell side type of pitch, this is something we're checking out. And if you don't want to join the club, every Monday at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, South Florida time, tune in and listen to Miami Condo Mondays. Normally, my partner, Jenny Wirtz of CVR Realty, would be with us, but as mentioned, she's traveling, and because she's traveling, things got a little bit mixed up. So therefore, I'm strong enough. I think I can kind of go it alone on my own. So let's get into what we're going to be discussing today. We're talking about Fort Lauderdale. Some of you may know it. Some of you may not know it. Some of you might say, what is it? Where is it? Well, I should tell you, there is still to this day a lot of talk, just in fact about the name. There's a columnist who used to write for the South Florida Sun Sentinel, and he wrote a column saying that Fort Lauderdale, remember, named after a military fort way back in the day, I think it was Seminole War times. But basically, there was talk about he actually dropping the name Fort Lauderdale, dropping the name Fort from Fort Lauderdale, just calling it Lauderdale in Broward County. Now, something like this, it might seem a little bit strange, but it's really not if you look at the history of what's going on in South Florida. There's a lot of communities, especially in Broward County, where they added the word beach to their name. A place that comes to mind is Hallandale. Hallandale, for the longest time, which is a city in southeast Broward County, it was called Hallandale, and they wanted to make it more appealing, more attractive. And what they did is they added the name beach to it. So suddenly you get Hallandale Beach. So name changes do occur down here. County names change. The longest time when I first got here in 1993 to South Florida, it was Dade County. It was Dade County, as in Dwayne Wade. You remember him? So when Dwayne Wade, the basketball player from the Miami Heat, Hall of Famer, they used to call it Wade County, i.e. Dwayne Wade, and it was called Dade County. So there you go. You had Dade County, which then became Miami-Dade County. Why? Marketing. It's easier to put things on the maps in your mind. So when you get to Fort Lauderdale, a lot of people local, they'll refer to it to Lauderdale. Not everybody actually pronounces it as Fort Lauderdale. So something to keep in mind. Broward County, kind of give you some perspective. It's the county located in the center of the Tri-County South Florida area. To the south, you're going to have Miami-Dade County. In the middle, you're going to have Broward County, where Fort Lauderdale is located. And then to the north, you're going to have Palm Beach County, where Mar-a-Lago is located. That's where President Trump has his compound. So we got Miami-Dade County to the south, we got Broward County in the center, and then we got Palm Beach County to the north. Believe it or not, some of you might not know this, but actually Broward County was carved out of what was Palm Beach County and Dade County, or Miami-Dade County today. So those two counties, they basically had to give up some dirt. They all gave up both counties, Palm Beach and Dade County. They both gave up about the equivalent amount of space, and hence you got the creation of Broward County. That's when it came about. And if memory serves me correct, and I am going to refer to it shortly, but I'm pretty sure Broward County was named after a governor of the state of Florida. And at one point, Broward County, when they were kicking around the idea, there was some talk about calling it Everglades County. So just think about how that would have been the market, especially in today's world where we're, we got a bunch of different stuff going on. Which comes to mind like the alligator Alcatraz in the middle of the Everglades. So just imagine if Fort Lauderdale was located in Everglades County, and then lo and behold, you have this alligator Alcatraz. But that's a story for a different day. About 6.5 million people live in the Tri-County South Florida area. Again, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County. And down in Dade County, you're going to get 2.7 million or so. When you get to Broward County, we're talking ballpark 2 million or so. And then up in Palm Beach County, somewhere in the vicinity of 1.3 to 1.5 million. So overall combined, north of 6 million people living down here in this area. And Broward County's coming in. It's going to be the second largest. It's kind of like the middle kit. Just like the counties, Dade with the large population, Palm Beach with the smallest, and Broward's kind of stuck in the middle. It's also like that, too, if you look at the demographics of the area. Generally speaking, when you get into Miami-Dade County, it's going to be much more foreign-born. I think the rate is 54% of Miami-Dade County is foreign-born. You get a place like Broward County, it's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of about 32%. And then finally, when we get into Palm Beach County, you're talking low 20%. It's 22, 21, something like that. I did a study about a year ago or so, and I took a look at it, and I tried to just sort of figure out the population. Roughly in the Tri-County South Florida area, about 32, 33% of all residents are foreign-born. And what does that mean? That means in South Florida, if somebody invites you to dinner or go out for an event or anything like that, there's a 1 in 3 chance that the person inviting you actually wasn't born in the United States, but now is living here in South Florida. And that's really been one of the keys to our success in South Florida in terms of condos and pitching condos and selling real estate, is that this area, because of location, because of weather, because of a variety of beaches, because of a variety of other factors, it's really become an attractive place for different types of groups of people who like to come here, set up shop, and ultimately contribute to this very diverse community that we're in. I spent a lot of it in Broward County, and a lot of it just west of Fort Lauderdale. And by the way, when I'm talking about Fort Lauderdale, let me give you my rough boundaries. We like to go by physical boundaries. We don't necessarily like to go by whatever line that the municipality might have. So when I'm talking Fort Lauderdale, this is what I want you to have in your head. I want you to be thinking the Atlantic Ocean to the east. I want you to take it all the way 95 to the west, and then northern boundary. We're going to take it all the way up to Oakland Park Boulevard. Some of you locals are going to be like, what are you talking about, Oakland Park Boulevard? It shouldn't go that far north. Now you're getting into Welton Manors, you're getting other things. Hear me out. We want to go by physical boundaries in which we will be able to incorporate all of the condominiums located in this area. So Oakland Park Boulevard to the north, and then we're going to go down to State Road 84 or Marina Mile, whatever you want to call it, when you're on the southern side. Think about kind of like the southern entrance to get into Port Everglades. Port Everglades is the port down here in South Florida. And by the way, if you don't know, the Port Everglades is probably 3 to 4 times larger in terms of land that you're going to find at the Port of Miami. And I used to write about international trade for a while. And what's interesting about Port Everglades versus Port Miami, used to be called Port of Miami. Then they hired some consultant, and the consultant said, you know what? I don't know, $100,000 later, let's get rid of the word of. Just call it Port Miami. You don't need to call it Port. Just call it Port Miami. You don't need to call it Port of Miami. So that was money very well spent. But anyways, going back to Port Everglades. Port Everglades is much larger than what you're going to find at at Port Miami. And in terms of cargo, what kind of stuff that goes on? Well, for the most part, when you get into Port Miami, you're going to find that's primarily dominated by cruise ships. And then you got like transshipment type of stuff that's going on, stuff that's getting dropped off and then basically getting shipped out to, anywhere else, east-west type of corridor. Maybe some of it's going down to, South America. Rarely will it go into places like Central America and the Caribbean. When you want to get into that, you typically go out of Miami River and or Port of Palm Beach, which is all the way to the north. And it's a minuscule little port compared to what we got in Port Everglades, as well as, again, Port Everglades is Broward County and is in Fort Lauderdale, as well as Port Miami. Now, so what's the role of the port for Port Everglades? Well, it's interesting. That's actually where all the fuel farms are. So all of the refined, the stuff you put in your car to drive, if you're not driving an EV, the gas, it's coming in. I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of 69 counties of the, 67 in the state of Florida. So basically, I don't know what number I said. 39 counties. That should have been the number I said. So if you look at the counties and you look what's happening, they bring in all the refined petroleum, the stuff you're going to put in your car, the stuff you buy at the gas station. They bring it all in the Port Everglades. From there, it's put in the trucks, and then they kind of take it all around. So that's one role, a key role for Port Everglades. Another key role is basically going to be stuff that takes up a lot of space. Because they got so much land at Port Everglades, they're able to bring a lot of it in. And then, by the way, they also do some cruise ships. The cruise ship numbers aren't going to compare to what you got at Port of Miami. So, if it were up to me and I was advising this region how to do things based on, writing about international trade for quite some time, I would say take all the cruise ships, put them all in Miami, let them just run cruises out of there and take all of the cargo-related product and put it all in Broward County. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. And the reason it doesn't work is that these counties are very competitive and they're all competing against each other, trying to lure jobs and do a variety of different things. So therefore, we kind of got cruises and we got cargo at Miami, and we also have the same up in Port Everglades. And then when you get into Port of Palm Beach, just for whatever it's worth, that's going to be more of like real heavy type of stuff like cement and like bulky type of product. And then they do some cruises. There's a cruise called Margaritaville Cruise, which will take you out to Key West, take you to Bimini, places like that. You catch a cruise out of there, but that's going to be a, very small ship. It's not going to be the rock star ships that everybody's accustomed to seeing, when you see videos of South Florida or even you see the cruise ships. That's kind of gives you an overall perspective. Now, in terms of going back to Broward County and some of the things that are going on there, let me get a little bit into the history just because I want to spend about 4 or 5 minutes just kind of talking about the history. And let me see if I can share my screen. I would love to be able to share my screen with you. Let's see, screen. There we are. I'm going to pull up Broward County. Here we go. Let's see how it looks. First time I'm doing it here. Normally we have Jenny on there, but she's not here. So we're going to go ahead and share the screen. So I'm on Wikipedia right now, and everybody can see it up on Wikipedia. So just some of the things I was mentioning. You got about 2 million people living in Broward County, according to the 2020 census. Now, the city of Fort Lauderdale, this is interesting. If you check this out right over here, you're going to see it's about 183,000 people. Not very big, not very big. Actually, in the Miami metro area, It's actually the third largest city after Miami, as well as Hialeah, which is a suburb to the northwest of the city of Miami. And then continuing on, you're going to see Broward County, 6.4 million people overall in the Tri-County area, and then of which we're going to get about 2 million people or so, roughly, that are going to be in Broward County. Now, I was talking about how it was founded. Here we go. Here is Napoleon Bonaparte Broward. He lived from 1857 to 1910. He was the one in which the county was named after. If we check this out real quickly, Broward County was actually founded in 1915. 1915 it was founded, and at the time, you can see right here, they wanted to call it Everglades County. Everglades County is what it was going to be. That was a suggestion. Ultimately, it was shot down. And then what they ultimately decided to do is name Broward County after Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, who I guess served as governor. He served a 4-year term from 1905 to 1909. And the governor, apparently, according to Wikipedia, he was the one who's really pushing for draining the Everglades, just putting in the canals, getting rid of all the water, reclaiming the dirt. And then once you reclaim the dirt, you were going to be able to use it for agriculture. And then ultimately, it turned into housing as well as condos. So here we go with Mr. Bonaparte. So if anybody wants to look to the draining of all the canals, of all the Everglades and creating sellable land, you can credit or blame Napoleon Bonaparte Broward. And then if we see here in 1915, you will see where Palm Beach and Dade County, that's actually when they went ahead and they gave up their dirt. They gave up, you can see here, roughly equal portions of what they had. They turned it all over to Broward County, and Broward County was set up. And then finally, the first hotel to open in Fort Lauderdale, it would have opened in 1919. So that's a little overview about Broward County. Now, let me pull up real quick about Fort Lauderdale, and you guys can look it up on your own. You can, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to this stuff. I love to get on to Wikipedia. And kudos to Wikipedia. They do a fantastic job. It's all kind of, it's crafted by people who care and they want to input stuff. And then ultimately they have to footnote it. And if something's wrong, then they'll go ahead and change the marketplace. But some of the things I was mentioning, Fort Lauderdale, it was 183,000 people. It's going to follow Miami, and Hialeah is the third largest city ultimately in the Tri-County area. It says here that in 1838, it was first incorporated. So people were basically residing in Fort Lauderdale area since about 1838. Wow, think about that. I mean, we're just short of 200 years or so. But in 1911 is actually when it was incorporated. And there was a series of forts that were all built in and around that area. So they called it Fort Lauderdale. And you can see it was related to the Second Seminole Wars. The forts, they took their name from a major. The major's name was Major William Lauderdale, died in 1838. He was the younger brother of a Lieutenant Colonel, James Lauderdale. Development of the city did not begin until 50 years later, after the forts were abandoned and the end of the conflict. So there you go. You had Fort Lauderdale created basically because of the Seminole War, where they were driving people, the Seminoles, they were driving them off the land. They were putting them in different areas, and that's a whole different story. But basically, that's where the name is coming from. A couple little tidbits as we scroll down about the history of Fort Lauderdale. Let's get here into the 19th century. Let's see here. Oh, the New River. So in the 1830s, there were 70 settlers living along the New River. William Cooley, he was a local justice of peace. He's also a farmer and a wrecker, and he traded with the Seminole Indian tribe. And then in January of 1836, Cooley was leading an attempt to salvage a wrecked ship. A band of Seminoles attacked his farm, killing his wife and children and the children's tutor. The other farms in the settlement were not attacked, but all the while residents in the area abandoned their settlements, fleeing first to Cape Florida Lighthouse on Key Biscayne, and then ultimately the Key West. First United States stockade named Fort Lauderdale, and subsequently was the site of fighting during the Second Seminole War. So a little bit of history about that area. New River, if you don't know, New River is going to, it'll take you deep west into the Everglades. It actually takes you on the other side of Interstate 95. And then on the east side, it's going to dump into the Intercoastal Waterway. And then just on the other side of that will be the Atlantic Ocean, because there's a barrier island there. And then finally, let's see what we got here in the 20th century. World War II, Fort Lauderdale. It became a major U.S. base with a naval air station to train pilots, radar operations, and fire control operators. A Coast Guard base at Port Everglades was also established. So this is kind of an interesting tidbit because if you think back about what we were talking about Miami and Miami Beach, about how during World War II, the military set up a bunch of operations down here. They were using the hotels, especially Miami Beach, for the troops while they were training them before they sent them off to World War II. Same thing happened with Fort Lauderdale. And again, if you look at the port in Fort Lauderdale, Port Everglades, it's going to be massive. And it can actually, it can host, I should say, a bunch of military ships. That's why every year when they do the Air Sea Show and stuff like that, or Sailor Week or Navy Week or Fleet Week, yeah, that's what they call it. It's all up in Fort Lauderdale. Why? Because the infrastructure. So this all goes back to apparently World War II, probably before that, but World War II is really kind of what put it on the map in terms of a destination for the military. And then let's see here. We're gonna continue down. After the World War II, service members returned to the area, much like we discussed in Miami. Remember, I said in Key Biscayne, there were two brothers called the Mackles. They built a bunch of houses in and around Key Biscayne. They'd sold them. Lo and behold, as markets started to change, these little teardowns got replaced with mega mansions that are now north of, I don't know, $5-10 million or so. Continuing on, let's see what we got here. It says that in the 1920s, there was a boom, which we also had in Miami. Then, let's see, enormous population growth in the 1920s. Then in the 1960s, had only 84,000 people in the city of Fort Lauderdale, but that was still about 230% higher than 1950s figure. A 1967 report estimated the city was approximately 85% developed, and the population figure in 1970, about 139,600 people. And where are we today? We're somewhere in the ballpark of 185,000 or so ballpark. And then finally, last couple tidbits about population. After the 1970s growth spurt, people started moving to the west. And we had cities like Coral Springs, Miramar, Pembroke Pines. They all experienced significant growth. And Fort Lauderdale's population stagnated, and the city actually shrank by almost 4,000 people between 1980 in the 1980s. In 1980, I should say, 152,000 people lived in Fort Lauderdale. And then fast forward to where the census are today, and basically we're sitting at 183,000. Now, if you want to get a sense of Fort Lauderdale, just got to give you some context, north, south, east, west. So, you're going to have to the south, you got Dania Beach, you got Hollywood, you're going to have Hallandale, and then ultimately you're going to have Aventura, but that's too far south. And then if you go to the north, you're going to run into, let's see what they got listed here. You're going to have North Lauderdale, you have Oakland Park, you have Tamarack, you're going to have Wilton Manors, but we're including that in our list. And you got places like Pompano, and then just due west of us, you will have Plantation, Lauderhill, and Lauderdale Lakes. I spent a lot of time last week in Broward County, just west of Fort Lauderdale. Why was I there? Because I was going to see cricket. The first official approved, existing, ongoing cricket ground in the United States, as approved by the International Cricket Council, is actually in Lauderhill. Lauderhill is a community that's located right off of Sunrise Boulevard. You go west of Fort Lauderdale, on the other side of I-95, you're going to run into Lauderhill, and this is the community where they actually built this cricket ground. There's a brand new cricket league in the United States called Major League Cricket, the third season. And for the first time ever, they played a portion of their matches, roughly a third of them. They played them at this cricket ground in Broward County in Lauderhill. Last year, the World Cup of Cricket was also here, so a lot of money was invested. And going forward, Broward County is really planting its flag in trying to become a destination for cricket. For a number of years, and basically since cricket ground opened in somewhere in the ballpark 2009 or so, the West Indies, which is a team that incorporates all of the players in and around the Caribbean basin, everywhere from Guyana to Jamaica to places like that, they always play matches, home matches. They play them at Lauderhill in Broward County. So there's this long-standing history of cricket. And you say, well, Peter, what the hell do I care about that? Well, it just goes to show you some of the diversity that we have now. When you go to other parts of Broward County, like in Hollywood, Hallandale, we talked about it last week, you have a big Canadian contingent diaspora. And then when you go north of there, you're going to get in a place like Pompano Beach, and you're going to have a lot of Brazilians. Deerfield Beach, a lot of Brazilians. They're going to be up and around that area. So while the Miami-Dade County area might have its demographics and its feel and vibe, you're going to get a completely different vibe up in Broward County and especially in the Fort Lauderdale area. So I wanted to kind of give you a feel of what's going on. Let's go back and talk about Fort Lauderdale. We're going to drill down now because you got a general sense of the area. Let's talk a little bit about how Fort Lauderdale kind of breaks out. So to the south, ultimately, you're going to have the airport. You have Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Probably about 10 years back or so, they added another runway, and they extended over US 1. US 1 is the road that runs north-south. It's parallel with the coast. That was effectively I-95, Interstate 95, before they opened it up in the 50s and 60s. So US 1 was really the go-to type of route. So when because of growth going on at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, they had to add another runway, and the only way they could shoehorn it in was to go ahead and extend the runway over the, US 1, which is what it does today. Now, what's interesting about Fort Lauderdale, and sort of give you an idea about how they're really focused on like trade and international, right? Basically spitting distance from the airport, which would be just west, you're going to have Port Everglades. So it's all right there. You want to talk about transshipment hub. You want to talk about a place where it all kind of concentrated together. It's all virtually in and around that general vicinity. Unlike in Miami, and when you go into Miami, you're going to have the Port of Miami, obviously, is all the way on the coast. It's going to be just inland from the barrier island where Miami Beach and Fisher Island is, a man-made island. And then you got to go way the hell west to get to Miami International Airport. In Fort Lauderdale, the airport and the seaport obviously, is located on the coast. So just a little context. Now, as we continue north, the first big causeway you're going to get to in Fort Lauderdale will be 17th Street Causeway. That'll be the southern entrance to get onto the barrier island in Fort Lauderdale or Fort Lauderdale Beach. Kind of an interesting area. You got a lot of retail there. You got hospital there. To the west, you're going to have some little, I don't know, schlocky little 1-story and 2-story commercial spaces that with time, if the population of Fort Lauderdale grows, that's all going to be teared down. It's all going to be replaced with big rental towers. Some of the REITs are trying to build rental towers in and around there now, but basically it's what Miami was probably about 20 years ago. Certain parts of like Brickell Avenue, you see this piece of dirt with a high rise right next to it, and there'd be like a 1-story, 2-story building that you just knew was a teardown. So Fort Lauderdale still has that. So if you're an investor looking for maybe a land play, you want to bank some dirt, you want to pick it up for future development sometime in the future, I would tell you, take a look in and around that 17th Street Causeway. Not to the east, a federal highway, by the way, in Miami-Dade County, it's called Biscayne Boulevard. In Broward County, it's called Federal Highway. Again, just a little bit of the differences between the two counties. So Biscayne Boulevard is the same as Federal. So when you're in and around this Fort Lauderdale area, that 17th Street Causeway, the first causeway to get on the barrier island, if you were to go west of there, 17th and Federal, which in Dade County would be called Biscayne Boulevard, you go west of there, that's where you'd probably be able to find a bunch of dirt. So if you are somebody looking to build, or if you are somebody who maybe wants a land bank, you want to buy some dirt, this is an area I would definitely say put on your radar. It's always been up and coming, still hasn't arrived yet. There are signs of things happening positively, but generally speaking, it doesn't have the population thrust. I mean, think about the city of Miami, population's north of 400,000, and Fort Lauderdale's coming in at, what do we say, 183,000. So, but let's continue onward. Now we're gonna go north, and as we go north, we're gonna have a physical boundary that's kind of separate areas. It's gonna be called a New River. New River, again, is where one of the first settlements was set up. There was a trading post set up. In fact, it still stands today. The local government has taken steps to kind of preserve it. The Stranahan House is what it's called. So it's still there today. Remember when we talked about Brickell, Old Man Brickell, William Brickell, I call him Old Man Brickell just for you remember the story. Old Man Brickell had set up a trading post when he went down and bought a lot of the southern portion of the Miami River. And that's been torn down and replaced with a whole variety of different things, including possibly even this Miami Circle. But again, different story. But the Stranahan House is still there up in Fort Lauderdale. It's on the New River. So if any of you are in Fort Lauderdale, you're wandering around on the north bank of the river, you'll see this little house that's located right by the Cheesecake Factory, right off of Los Olas Boulevard, which is kind of their restaurant district in Fort Lauderdale. But Stranahan House is still there. The river's still there. You know what else is there? The tunnel. The first tunnel that we had down here in South Florida was actually built there. It's named after a former journalist who was really pushing for the tunnel at the time. Why? Because as you were on US 1, i.e., or I should say Federal Highway, as you were going north, you're going south, you run into this river, and there was a drawbridge. And every single time, because New River is a working river, every single time the drawbridge would go up and down and up and down. It was delaying traffic, much like what we get in downtown Miami off of Brickell Avenue. So journalists got together a campaign, and they were able to push forward and ultimately build a tunnel. They built a tunnel which will basically take you underneath the New River and to the other side. Now, when we go on the other side of the new river, you're going to effectively run into, you'll get some government pipes. Not well. We'll put it this way: the county jail is going to be located on the south bank of the river. You're going to have the courts. They're going to be located on the south bank of the river. In and around there. On the north bank of the river, it's going to be more like, I'd say it's more the professional orient. So if you want to compare it to Miami, Brickell Avenue would be private sector, and Central Business District or north of the river, that would be the government sector. Well, it's the reverse in Fort Lauderdale. So to the north, you're going to have private sector. To the south, you'll have the government related type of stuff. Generally speaking. So on the north side of the river, and by the way, do you guys remember the name Wayne Huizenga? Wayne Huizenga, remember he made his money. Well, he made his money with a bunch of different stuff. I think waste management as well as Blockbuster Video. Remember back in the day, you had to go to these independent little video shops. You rent a video, you have to return it, and then a guy rolls it all up, i.e. Blockbuster, Wayne Huizenga. Wayne Huizenga was based out of Fort Lauderdale. He made his money. He made a ton of money, and ultimately he contributed back in a big way to South Florida. He was the one who brought in the Florida Panthers, who, by the way, just won their second straight Stanley Cup. 2 in a row, and they've been in the Stanley Cup, which is a championship in the National Hockey League. 3 years in a row they've gone. They've won 2 of them. But why are they here? Because Wayne Huizenga. Hockey wanted to come into South Florida. Wayne Huizenga was the guy with the cash. He had the interest, and he paid to bring the franchise here. Who else did he bring? He brought the what originally was called the Florida Marlins, but he brought the what's now called the Miami Marlins, because thanks to Wayne Huizenga. He brought him in here, and then the crown jewel while he was still alive was he owned the Miami Dolphins. So Wayne Huizenga is somebody who put South Florida on the map in terms of professional sports as we know him today. But more importantly, he was based out of Fort Lauderdale. So Wayne Huizenga is one of the people you would point to when you in and around Fort Lauderdale. Now we're going north of this new river. Remember, go from south to north. Remember, we started 17th Street Causeway, that road off Federal. We continue on. We go underneath the new river. Now we get on the north side, and where you're going to get private sector situation. You have other things. But the real area to emerge there in the last 10 to 15 years as you're continuing north of Federal is going to be Flagler Village. Flagler Village for the longest time was this beat up old rundown area. Kind of reminds you of like West Brickell, if you want to refer to Greater Downton Miami. And during the last run up, they put up thousands of rental towers. Well, mid-rises, let's say. None of them are really spectacularly high, but they're all, it's your typical 8 stories, 10 stories, 300 units. They all kind of look and feel the same way. They got the wrought iron balconies. Some of them have the glass, some of them don't. But that was a ton of rentals going up there, and that's a place called Flagler Village, and then the retail has since followed. So Flagler Village, very interesting market, very strong rental market. Some condos, but not overwhelming amount of condos. We'll then continue north, and when we'll get to Sunrise Boulevard. Sunrise Boulevard will be the road, which is going to take you to the Barrier Island. So when you're on Federal, you go north. Most of the city will be on the west hand side. The left side, you would have gone past Flagler Village. You're going to get up where the road sort of curves. That's where you're going to run into Sunrise. If you were to take Sunrise due east, you'll ultimately end up on a causeway that takes you over into Fort Lauderdale Beach. So primarily the beach, for the most part, generally speaking, is going to be Sunrise down to 17th Street Causeway. However, going north, the northern entrance will be Oakland Park Boulevard, which is why we included in our overview of the Fort Lauderdale area. So if you kind of break it down, you got 17th Street Causeway, you got Sunrise Boulevard, and then you're going to have Oakland Park Boulevard. But because we're talking about Sunrise, let's talk about that. As you go east there, that's going to be where you had that Galleria Mall. Galleria Mall was spectacular back in the day, located right by the Intercoastal. So if you were somebody who was living in and around the water, whether it was on the Barrier Island or it was on the mainland overlooking the Intercoastal. Remember, Fort Lauderdale likes to claim itself as a boating capital of the United States, the French Riviera, the this or that. And you had this mall, the spectacular mall is located right there. Well, tons of change. And this Galleria Mall, which has a huge footprint, they've tried to put up condos there for quite some time. They try to do massive developments. It's always kind of been shot down, and a lot of projects get shut down in Fort Lauderdale because for the longest time, it was a anti-development community from my perspective. Fort Lauderdale likes to have quality of life, kind of like a Miami Beach vibe. They didn't necessarily want massive, overwhelming development like you're going to find in places like downtown Miami. Fort Lauderdale always went the other way. They always wanted controlled growth. People wanted the quality of life. It was more so about the locals than it was about the developers basically trying to put up some stuff. Remember when Miami really began its boom, it was ranked the poorest big city in the United States based on Census Bureau data. That was going back to 2000 census. Miami was the poorest big city in the country. And downtown Miami was, for the most part, it was desolate. There was nothing going on there. They used to put cages over the air conditioning, compressors up on the roof of commercial buildings because people would be stealing that type of stuff. So Miami needed growth, and they basically opened up the floodgates, and they're saying, come on down and put it up. Fort Lauderdale had the opposite approach. Fort Lauderdale has always sort of been controlled growth. Let's sort of maintain some of our history. Let's manage what we're doing. Let's live here. Let's kind of be in tune with it. So I would say that's probably a very big difference between what you're going to find in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Although in recent years, though, Fort Lauderdale has seen more and more development starting to occur because, remember, when we had the Great Recession, a lot of communities really struggling because they didn't have enough new development. They didn't have enough units to basically keep everything going as property values started to come down. We don't have state income tax in the state of Florida. Therefore, a lot of the coffers are filled for the county, the school, and the city. They're filled with real estate taxes. And if values pull down or pull back, lo and behold, in theory, you got less cash coming in. So that's a hard lesson certain cities like Fort Lauderdale and like Boca Raton learned during the Great Recession. So now there's more development coming to Fort Lauderdale. I would still argue it's somewhat controlled type of development, more so than you're going to find in Miami. Who's to say what this Live Local Act will do and how it will play out? If you're not familiar with Live Local Act, it's basically a way for the states allowing developers to basically bypass local government bodies in order to put something up. And the way it works is basically if you build a workforce type of housing, something that's more, it's price sensitive for people who are living here locally, and 40% of it ballpark is earmarked for that more affordable housing, workforce type of housing, then you can go as tall as any building in and around a 1 mile radius of the property. So this is what's, I would argue, probably going to lead to a lot of demolition of some of this older controlled growth that Fort Lauderdale has maintained for the longest time. And it'll probably start to get phased out. One tidbit talking about Fort Lauderdale, they have this strip called Las Olas. Las Olas is where you're going to have some, you'll have office buildings, primarily like the main like private office building sector of Fort Lauderdale, Las Olas Boulevard. That road will go straight up. Then you get into a restaurant district. You're going to have all kind of 1 stories and 2 stories, cafe culture type of area. There were some bars, there's some galleries. That's where they do the Las Olas art show, art festival every year. Then as you continue eastward, you're going to go over a series of little bridges and your way to getting to the beach, to Fort Lauderdale Beach. So as you're going on this stretch from the restaurant district over to the beach, you're going to have a whole series of finger islands, man-made islands that were put up. And for the longest time, they had single family, but increasingly, some of it was zoned for and was built upon there were hotels. Those are getting replaced by condos, which tend to be 4, 5, 6 stories tall. And they're expansive types of units. Why? Because the groups that are building, groups like Ocean Land, which is one of them, they're building product for people living out west and the west ends of the world and the suburbs behind a wall, a gated community. And they're giving them everything that they have basically in a house. So a big type of unit, not the same size as the house, but something expansive. And they're giving them a condo where they can now be basically within walking distance of the beach, of the restaurant district, of the building, stuff like that. So that's been very successful, I'd say, since the Great Recession. That's one phase we have seen occurred. And that's all. A lot of it occurred over in that Finger Islands area on Las Olas as you're going over to the beach. Now we'll jump back to the north. We were on Sunrise. Remember I mentioned you the Galleria. Galleria is a big piece of dirt at some point when the whole thing is developed. That will bring a massive number of condos and rentals and other stuff to the area. Thus far, it hasn't really played out. By the way, on Sunrise, if you were to go opposite direction, due west, That's where you run into your cricket ground. So, but just 'cause I'm a cricket fan, trying to hope that other people get into the cricket game, just because I think it could be good just for the local community. Yeah, it's good to have like these unique types of characteristics, at least in my opinion. Now from Sunrise, if we continue north up towards Oakland Park Boulevard, we're going to stay on Federal Highway. You're going to get into some one-story, I'd call it suburban type of big box and suburban restaurants of the world, the Olive Gardens of the world, the Carrabba's, car dealerships, all of that stuff for the most part. All of that dirt is zoning might not allow it yet, and density might not be there yet, but that's all likely. That stuff is likely to get replaced sometime in the future if and when Fort Lauderdale gets built out. It'll get replaced with condo towers. I don't think there's any question about that. A higher density. Right now, there's a lot of surface parking lots. Surface parking lots, I always say, especially when you're this close to the water, it's pretty much, time's ticking on that type of outlook for that type of dirt. You jump over to the barrier island in and around the same area. So east of Sunrise, east on Sunrise over the barrier island, you're going to run into some public land. You'll run into public parks. You'll run into single family houses. Then you get into an area called Gulf Ocean Mile. These are going to be a whole series of old condo towers that were put up in the 70s and 80s, and 60s that right now are really struggling with everything that's going on as a result of the Surfside condo collapse in June of 2021. 98 people died and $1 billion settlement was paid out. Legislation has since followed requiring these old condo associations. They have to do a variety of different things. One of the primary thing is to inspect the buildings, make sure they're safe, have licensed architects and engineers check them out, come up with a roadmap, what needs to be fixed, what's the timeline, what's the cost, and then have people start paying. Well, a lot of that is going to be concentrated in this Fort Lauderdale area on the barrier island, on A1A, State Road A1A, which is now renamed Jimmy Buffett Boulevard in the state of Florida. So there, going north of Sunrise, you're going to run into a bunch of old ass condos. This would be an area that if you are an investor, you are a speculator, and you're looking to pick up some stuff and you're willing to roll the dice, this might be an area to sort of check out. Gulf Ocean Mile. And what is it all about? It's all about older, expansive units that were put up quite some time ago, back when living in a condo was a luxury rather than a utility that we have today. And as a result of that, these buildings, some have been maintained, many have not been maintained. There's going to be huge special assessments if they're not already in place. But if you can potentially, and you have the willingness, go ahead and take a look at or run at some of the units, these old, expansive units in a building that's got a seal of approval from a licensed architect or a licensed engineer, and a report that's signed that banks and everybody else will take a look at. Remember, like when these architects and engineers are signing off on this stuff, not only are they facing civil, but they also could be facing criminal. So they're taking it very serious. So if you get one of these reports on a condo building and you like one of the units and the prices are good, this might actually be something for you to consider, because you're going to have the best of both worlds. One side is it's been inspected and everything is supposed to be legit. And two, this was built a long time ago where they can't replicate that today. And because everybody is sort of fleeing these old condos, this might be an opportunity. So this is something I would sort of throw out to you, kind of keep in mind. So that's a general sense of the Fort Lauderdale area. And by the way, if we were to continue north, we'd run into Pompano, we'd run into Deerfield Beach, and then we run up into Boca Raton in Palm Beach County. So that gives you a sense of the kind of layout of Fort Lauderdale. Now let's get into some of the numbers. So let's go ahead and we're going to pull up Fort Lauderdale. And as we're pulling up Fort Lauderdale, let me give you some quick data that I ran. This is what we got going on the vintage condo side. And by the way, for anybody who is interested, vintage condo is a building that's 30 years or more, age 30 years or more. Why? That's when you have to do this big in-depth study called a milestone inspection report, or a milestone study. So let me just show you the sense real quick here. So we can see here that what the boundaries are as laid out. And you'll see that we're going to compare the sales to the winter buying season. Winter buying season is a 6-month period, the most active time when people are down here, although many of them tend to close later on in the summer buying season because it's a process in order to buy. So you get a sense there. So we're going to go with the overall condos. You got 1,000 condos on the market right now in Broward County. They want about $1.1 million a door. And if we play that out in terms of price per square foot, $618 a foot and about 144 days on the market. So those condos that have been put on the market for sale, they've been there 144 days. Now, typically a listing is about 6 months. So any realtor who hasn't been able to convince their seller to lower the price to something more reasonable, chances are that listing could be coming up. And as that listing comes up, the new realtor will probably come in, replace them, convince the owner that's overpriced, get him the cut, and then the second reel will probably get the deal if the price is enough. Now, let's take a look real quick. We got 1,021 condos on the market. We got about 51 pending sales. And how many traded during the winter? 465. 465, that's not really that much. So if we play it out, that's about 78 condos that traded each and every month during the winter, the busy time. And what does that play out to? Plays out to about 13.2 months of supply, 13.2 months of supply. What should the supply be? It should be 6 months. Anything less than 6 months is seller market. Anything more is a buyer's market. So we are in a buyer's market for condos up in Fort Lauderdale. Let's take a look real quick at vintage. These are the old ones, these ones I was referring to. So on the vintage side, 511 condos are on the market, 30 years or more, 20-year under contract, 269 traded during the winter. That's an average of about 45 a month. And we got about 11 months of supply. So you can see there is overall the vintage condos, they're doing a little bit better in terms of supply than the overall market, but still 6 months is equilibrium. So it's a little bit of a challenge there. And let's see what else we got. Oh, this is our index. We do an index every week where we're tracking 23 markets throughout South Florida, real-time track based on actives and pending sales. Now, let's take a look at vintage. What's going on the pricing? $450,000 a door versus $1.1 million. So if you were to buy a vintage unit, you're looking at a ballpark of about paying 42 cents on the dollar or getting about a 58% discount over the overall asking price. This is why I say if you can get a building that's been inspected and it's been, it has a signature and you can get a copy of the report and they tell you what the roadmap is for the future. This is why a vintage condo might actually make some sense. You can see it right there yourself. 58% cheaper on average to go ahead and take a run at a vintage condo in Fort Lauderdale than at downtown Fort Lauderdale Beach than it will an overall condo. Sorry, I had to have something to drink there. We'll continue on. The pending sales, they were on the market $1 million or so. And the ones that are vintage that are pending right now, about 623,000, much different. And then what did they trade for during the winter? Traded for about $697,000 on the overall condo side, vintage $410,000. So there you're going to see that it basically works out to about a 41% discount or 41% cheaper to buy a vintage condo than it is an overall condo. This is why I say, take a look at the vintage if, in fact, you can get one of these reports signed off on by a licensed architect, licensed engineer. And one other tidbit I would throw out to you just real quickly. We like to look at this. This is the spread between the asking price and the sales price. This number should be 20%. Now, why should it be 20%? It should be 20% because the thought process is the seller is going to get a premium off of the last sale because it's in demand. And they're probably going to have to split the difference in terms of what they're asking versus what they receive. So typically you will see this at 20%, and then they split the difference, and there's a 10% big paid. Now, when I see 54%, this says to me one of two things. One, the sellers are out of touch with what's really going on in the market. Or two, the sellers are very confident in terms of what they have. They think they have gold when even though others might not think it's gold. So when you see that big of a spread, that's typically a miss. You don't waste your time on that because the sellers are completely out of touch. Now, when you see this 9.6% or 10%, that suggests to me that this person wants a deal. That person is pricing the unit to trade, not at a premium, but basically at what the market was. So 10% spread between the asking price and the sales price, and a 54% spread between the asking price and the sales price. That shows you that the vintage condo sellers, they want to get out. So you're interested in vintage, take a look at it. $410 a door is what we are talking about. Let's just run this out really quick on the price per square foot. You can see a vintage condos traded for $377 a foot over in Fort Lauderdale area, and about 8% spread. These things are basically being priced to sell. So if I am a buyer, I am going to lowball even lower. Why? Because there's obviously some pain there and there's some people who want to get out. And if I'm a seller and I need to move, I would probably be very bold and cut my price dramatically in order to get it out the door. Why? Because you got 13 months of overall supply and 11 months of vintage supply. this is the type of stuff that you should really sort of factor in going forward, because it's just going to get more and more difficult as more and more people put properties on the market. So keep that in mind. And then finally, on the sales versus the overall asking prices, the sales number of days, how long did it take to sell versus how many days have been on the market? So a vintage condo today has been on the market 132 days. During the winter buying season, they were able to trade in 93 days. So what does that mean? So during the winter, you put your place for sale, you got it under contract, you got it closed, the whole transaction, 93 days. On vintage, 97 overall. Where are we today? Vintage has been on the market 132 days and they haven't closed. And chances are, if they are going to close, once they go under contract, it'll take 30 to 60 days. So let's just play this out. Now we're getting close to somewhere in the vicinity of 6 months or so, 5 months. So if you're somebody who's trying to get out of it, out of a property, factor that in when you're going on the market, because that's going to be quite some time you're going to be sitting on the market. So A, should I keep it listed? Or B, should I cut my price because I simply want to get out? So that's something to factor in. So how much time are we into this market? Oh, look at that. I spent 55 minutes already. Who thought I could go for an hour? Nobody would have thought about it. Well, I knew I could do it. Now, the final tidbit, and if Jenny was here, my partner over at CVR Realty, check out her website, cvrrealty.com. I work hand in hand with her. I am the macro. She is the micro. People come to me for stuff. I recommend that they work with Jenny over at CVR Realty. We work hand in hand. But if you don't need a broker and you are interested in getting some of the data and listening into a monthly meeting and stuff like that, I encourage you to join our club, Miami Condo Investing Club. Website is miamicondo.club. Our next virtual monthly meeting, remember, we do them on the second Wednesday of every month. We do them from 12 to 1 o'clock, and then there's a 50-minute Q&A. Our next monthly meeting is this Wednesday. It's going to start at noon, South Florida time. So if you want to listen in on that, I'd encourage you to go ahead and sign up for the club now. Go to miamicondo.club. So finally, Jenny, I brought that up before I gave you my little spiel. Jenny always likes to push back, and everybody in the industry likes to push back, because there's something called the 1% rule, the infamous 1% rule that a lot of people don't necessarily care for. By the way, I just noticed I got a logo. I don't know if you guys know what that is. SALT. That's actually the University of Miami's marine biology school. It's out there on Virginia Key. Out there. I sound like a Canadian. I was talking about the Canadians in Hollywood Hellendale last week. It must have carried over. Although some people do say I sound Canadian. I'm originally from Chicago, but I've been out there since 1993. But basically, SALT, this is it's a bar. It's a bar set up for the students of the University of Miami Marine Biology. So if you are in South Florida, you're looking for a place on the weekends to go have some drinks. I don't know if they're open on Saturday and Sunday. They're definitely open during the week. They have a bar. They sell some food. It's kind of like a college type of vibe. It's open to the public. And the view is great because you're right there on the water. You sit on the water, and many of the students who are taking out the ships and doing things and getting educated there, they all go hang out in this bar. It's called SALT. So I got a glass from there, and you want something a little bit different, go check it out one evening, one happy hour, whatever the case may be. You might actually like that. So, but going back to the realtors, there's something called the 1% rule, and you can look it up. You go Investopedia, you go anywhere, 1% rule of real estate. And what it basically says is, if you want to ballpark and try to get a sense, a quick underwriting, if you will, a back of the napkin approach to see if you should waste time going forward and doing due diligence or not, use something called the 1% rule. 1% rule says whatever your monthly rent is, that should represent 1% of the values. For instance, if a place is worth $100,000, you need to get $1,000 a month rent. If a place is worth $1 million, you need to get $10,000 a month rent. So your friend, when you were at the barbecue over the 4th of July weekend, they told you that they bought a place for $400,000. Now it's worth $1 million. Well, you should know, based on the 1% rule, if they paid $400,000, therefore they ought to be getting $4,000 a month rent. But if it's worth $1 million today, they need $10,000 a month rent. And this is a number that Jenny and others always say doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work until it works. Until it works. We've run numbers going all the way back to the Great Recession, and even before the Great Recession, and it does work. It does work at times. It's just we go through these ebbs and flows of the marketplace. So I always like to go to 1% rule, and she's not here, but I want to go ahead and I want to hit on the 1% rule anyways, and I'm sure she'll, if and when she watches this, I'm sure she will give me some hell about it. But let's talk about the 1% rule. So in Fort Lauderdale, just to remind you, the average asking price of a condo is about $1.1 million is the average asking price. And the average asking price of a vintage unit is going to be about $450,000. So what does that mean? So the average condo in Fort Lauderdale on the market at $1.1 million effectively is going to need to get somewhere in the vicinity about $11,000 a month rent. $11,000 a month rent on the asking. So if you go in today and you pay that average asking price, you need 11 grand a month rent. Now, if you buy a vintage unit, you're going to pay $450,000 and you're going to need about $4,500 a month rent. So overall condo, $11,000 a month rent is what I need. Vintage condo, $4,500 a month rent is what I need. What is going on in the rental market in Fort Lauderdale right now? Well, right now, the median asking price for a rental, $2,600. $2,600. Let me remind you, if you buy if you buy a condo, an overall condo in Fort Lauderdale, you need $11,000 a month rent. If you buy a vintage condo, you need $4,500 a month rent. And what are they asking in Fort Lauderdale today? They're asking $2,600. That's the median price. Now, there's exceptions, stuff happens, there's possibilities, there's this, there's that, but those are real numbers. $2,600 is what they ask. What did they actually get during the winter buying season with November of 2024 through April of 2025? How much they actually get on a median basis? They got $2,100, $2,100. You can see there's a disconnect here. There's a significant disconnect here. And that significant disconnect is why I called in January that we need to see about a 40% price decrease, 40% price decrease based off pandemic highs. During the pandemic, prices pulled back and then they skyrocketed. And we're still dealing with the remnants of what happened because of the pandemic. And that's why we have 13 months of supply overall Fort Lauderdale condo market and 11 months on the vintage side. That's why we have people who are asking prices that are far higher than what the average transaction price is. And the reason they're doing that is that they pay too much. They simply pay too much. They can't get out. They're trying to get out. They're hoping they can get out. They're trying to fend off the inevitable where they're going to have to take a haircut. Now, some of them, maybe the market changes. Maybe something occurs. Maybe the legislation that just went into effect July 1st related to the Florida condo law, maybe some of that is going to help. But at this point, they are overvalued. They are significantly overvalued. And they're already in a buyer's market. 6 months of supply is equilibrium. Less than 6 months, seller's market. More than 6 months, buyer's market. 13 months of supply in Fort Lauderdale. 11 months supply of vintage condos in Fort Lauderdale. So where are we today in the Fort Lauderdale condo market? Well, we're in a situation where it's cheaper than Miami. There's no question. There's new development. There are opportunities, especially if you want land, like I said, just west of Federal Highway, especially down there near the 17th Street Causeway. There's places you can pick up stuff relatively reasonable for South Florida, but we're still overvalued. We're overvalued based on the 1% rule, which every realtor hates to hear about. Again, $11,000 is what you need in rent in Fort Lauderdale. If you buy a condo today, what are you actually getting? You're getting $2,100 on a median basis. Now, everything is different, but keep that in mind. If you want to buy a vintage condo, $4,500 a month rent is what you need based on a sales price of the winter of $450,000. And what are you getting? Well, we didn't break it out for vintage versus overall. Why? Many renters will simply chase the price. So whatever the product quality is and the square footage and everything else, they want certain things. Typically a renter, most important thing is price. If it's in that general vicinity, they don't need to have everything perfect. They will work within it. So that's why I kind of bring up that point about, not breaking out vintage versus overall condos. Now I'm going to blow up my screen now. You guys can't see this, but I can. So that is my overview about the Fort Lauderdale condo market. It is a buyer's market. It's not as bad as Greater Downton Miami, not as bad as Miami Beach, definitely not as bad as Sunny Isles Beach, which is, one of the worst markets out there. But it's got some issues. One of the issues is the amount of supply. It's not overwhelming at this point, but what is overwhelming is nothing's trading. Nothing is trading. And some will push back and say, well, Peter, it's a summer buying season. These people, maybe nobody's down here. It's a hot one. We've had other issues. Maybe they were busy watching cricket, whatever the case may be. But, these are warning signs. These are something to keep in mind. What you should also keep in mind too, is that here we are in July. We're in the first full week of July, second week of July, though, calendar-wise, we got our pause on this Liberation Day tariffs that were announced on April the 2nd. All that's starting to come due, and we're supposed to get 90 trade deals in 90 days, and we haven't gotten them. Because we haven't gotten them, expect some uncertainty in the stock market going forward. Expect some uncertainty related to a variety of different things. Earnings will begin for the second quarter. They're going to start coming out next week, and as the earning numbers start to come out, there is some talk that some of the tariffs that were put in place, companies have been absorbing it, and now when the companies go ahead to report their profits, if their profits have shrunk, the stocks are going to have to be recalibrated, the price, to reflect what their new profits are. So there is some concern on Wall Street that you're going to see a pullback in the stock market going forward. And then finally, because the second quarter has ended, our GDP numbers will be coming out sometime soon. If you don't know, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of contracting GDP. We contracted in the first quarter. So if this second quarter, remember Liberation Day, remember stock market volatility, if we contract in the second quarter, there's a likelihood we could be in recession. Who knows how it's going to play out? Nobody knows. They've been predicting recessions forever and ever and ever, and we haven't got one for quite some time. By the way, who decides a recession? It's a body that officially dons it or names it a recession versus not a recession. Because during the previous administration, there were 2 consecutive quarters of contracting GDP, but somehow it wasn't deemed a recession. But that's above my pay grade. So these are some of the factors going in there. In May, we called for a summer of paralysis by analysis or a summer of wait and see. We're standing by that. We don't think anything's really going to open up probably till Labor Day. Because here we are in July. Once you get into August, now the hurricane seasons really starts to intensify. The rains start to intensify. You got a lot of people who are taking their kids on vacation before the kids go back to school. Down here in South Florida, they go back to school late August. So August tends to be a dead month, not a lot of stuff going on, and then everything opens up after Labor Day. So if you're watching this video and you're wondering about what to do going forward, I would tell you most people are sitting on the sidelines. But if you have the willingness to jump in and play the game, you can see that inventory is growing, and you can see too, though, that some pricing on the overall condos still too high. But on the vintage side, you're starting to see some sellers who are willing to kind of, maybe mix it up, if you will. So I would kind of sort of throw that out there to you. So that is my overview on the Fort Lauderdale condo market as we sit here with our Miami Condo Mondays podcast. Do them every Monday, 4 o'clock South Florida time. They're about an hour or so, and we're going to give you something interesting or educational about the condo market. So stop listening to that 1980s classic rock or slow, soft rock while you're driving home and you're stuck in traffic, or maybe you're on the train, or maybe, you're sick of your boss. You want to tune him or her out, put in the AirPods, and go ahead and listen to that. But every Monday, we'll be giving you this conversation. Jenny, she's traveling. She's going to be back next Monday. Next Monday, we're going to be talking about a market in Dade County. It's either going to be North Bay Village and or Aventura. So we will update you on that. So I'd encourage everybody to tune in and follow us. We're also going to post a recording of this video, probably posted later today. And then in addition to that, I want to remind you that we got the Miami Condo Investing Club. Again, if you're a DIYer, you want to do it yourself, you're looking for data, straight third party, direct, straightforward information, encourage you to check us out. We do a virtual meeting. Our next virtual meeting, monthly virtual meeting, is going to be this Wednesday at 12 o'clock South Florida time. I'll go to about 1 o'clock. Then there's a 15-minute question to answer. And then we also do physical meetups meetups that are in person, I should say. They're not virtual. Monthly meetings virtual. The meetups are not. We're doing that. We're going to be doing that next Tuesday. That'll be over in downtown Miami. And then finally, if anybody's interested in playing the condo game, I do walking tours. We go out for about 3 hours, walk about 4 miles or so, give everybody who attends one of our tours on different markets across South Florida. We give them a list of every single condo that exists in there. And I tell you history, I tell you stories. I also teach you how to analyze a condo building. So you should know whether or not you should concentrate on it and take a run at it. Why do we do that? Because our approach is you find buildings you like. Once you find the buildings you like, then you're able to drill down and focus on the units you like. Too many people are running around chasing cats or trying to herd cats in that they're looking at this unit, they're looking at that unit, this unit. We think it's more important to identify a building that makes sense. Remember, you got a lot of stuff going on right now with the structural integrity reserve studies, with the milestones, everything post-Surfside. It's important to understand the building. The building is more important probably than the unit. So we encourage people to figure out the building. Once you got the building, then you start to figure out the unit that you're willing to buy. Or you make an adjustment and you go in a different direction. But that's how we think you should do it rather than chasing individual units. So part of the tour, we teach you how to analyze the different buildings where you can go in there and see if you're going to target one building or another. Is this one they're going to be willing to negotiate? This one they're not willing to negotiate? These are things to sort of keep in mind. So the tours, we're doing them on Fridays. You want information on tours, go to Miami Condo Club.eventbrite.com, Miami Condo Club.eventbrite.com, or go to the website, miamicondo.club. I'm Peter Zalewski. This is Miami Condo Mondays. Jenny will be back next week. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for, having interest in Fort Lauderdale in the condo market. And I wish everybody a happy summer, and we will see you next week. So take care, everybody. Ciao, ciao.